Gates Foundation CEO Mark Suzman says the way wealthier countries responded to the pandemic stoked mistrust with countries that struggle with poverty. In a wide-ranging conversation, Suzman talks about the growing gap between what's known as the Global South and the Global North, and his latest piece in Foreign Affairs, The Roots of the Global South's New Resentment, and he spoke with Bloomberg's Jennifer Zabasajja.
Mark, thank you so much for being here. I want to start first with this op-ed that you wrote in the Foreign Affairs, and specifically a quote that you touched on. You said, wealthy countries need to take concrete steps towards repairing the trust deficit, or the rift will grow with a lot of African countries. Can you talk about that?
Yes, so very specifically, whether it comes to the discussion about climate, whether it comes to the discussion around the COVID response, whether it comes now to the discussion around critical issues like the debt crisis, there is a huge amount of rhetorical commitment, a lot of which is you will hear in meeting after meeting here in Marrakesh about what could and should be done. But when you actually look at where the follow-up is there actually money, resources, policy being implemented that support the countries of the Global South, and particularly supporting the low-income countries that are facing the greatest pressure? Sadly, we have not yet seen very much.
Are you seeing steps taken towards reversing that, though, this week?
Yes, well, that is absolutely the hope. So I think Ajay Banga, as the new head of the World Bank, has put forward an ambitious agenda. There's some very exciting proposals, both around bigger issues about how you might use and expand hybrid capital around critical issues like the energy transition, and also how we might reinvigorate instruments like IDA, which is the International Development Association, is the pool of World Bank resources that the low-income countries draw from. And so, again, there's a lot of good things being said, but what we really need to see is that translate into actual commitments, both into there's currently a crisis window that's open, requesting resources for IDA that we'd like to see high-income countries contribute to this week, have a big commitment about what's going to come in the forthcoming COP, the Conference of Parties on climate that we'll have in the UAE, and to make sure, again, that there's a big focus on topics like adaptation. Currently, adaptation, which is really how countries deal now with the consequences, droughts, floods, related crises, where the countries of the Global South, particularly in the tropics, are by far the most affected in real time, especially farmers and communities like that. But so far, roughly only about a tenth of the resources that go to climate go into those kinds of investments. And so for all of those, there's some great proposals on the table, both here this week and for the coming climate summit. And we very much hope that this comes apart, so we will see a real shift in momentum and energy and attention, but the test will be, do the resources follow?
And we've heard from the African Union as well, sort of make their own calls, especially something that you've echoed, MDB reforms in particular. Is the Gates Foundation aligned with what the African Union is calling for, or do you want to take it even a step further than what they've asked?
No, we're very aligned, and actually we'll be hosting some meetings today and tomorrow that work particularly with a group of African finance ministers and other partners to make sure there is a strong aligned voice coming from Africa specifically, but the Global South more broadly, around the steps that need to take place, and the expectation that the multilateral development banks, and when you talk about MDB reform, will still keep a firm focus on the primary mission of investing in poverty reduction and in health and education and other core human capital investments. And that as we tackle the very critical issue of climate, that does not come at the expense of those core investments, but it really is additional. It's a both-and set of investments.
And if that doesn't happen, you mentioned the rift will grow. What does that mean? I mean, what does that look like in today's terms?
Well, the rift has very concrete consequences in terms of the impact on people. Already, there are over 60 countries in the Global South, very many of them on the continent of Africa, who are paying more in debt service than they are in health and education. That clearly is not the right kind of prioritization that we need if we're going to be investing in the continent of the future. And so we need to have a set of steps which include, we haven't mentioned the debt relief, but some steps of debt relief, some forms of new concessional capital coming in that are in exchange for countries prioritizing these sets of investments in their own people. And if you don't have it, first and foremost, what you'll see is a widening poverty gap. a widening income, a widening health gap. Already, COVID has had a much bigger impact than most people realize, not through COVID directly, but we'd seen a halving of extreme poverty in the world, including on the continent of Africa in the first 2 decades of the 21st century. That has stalled in the last 3 or 4 years, and we've actually seen poverty increase and median incomes are not going up. We'd seen a halving of child mortality, preventable child mortality on the continent of Africa and in the world in the first 2 decades. That has stalled. Vaccination rates are still not back to where they were in 2019. We've seen massive setbacks in education. This is a very real-time human crisis that is then exacerbated by the climate crisis. So it's not just that the rift will grow, and the rift is real with the political resentment from the global south that their needs are not being met, but it has very real human consequences on the people that need those critical investments.
And on the contrary, I mean, the Gates Foundation also had their annual meetings this week in Dakar in Senegal. And you guys announced a number of investments into vaccinations and really increasing vaccinations for this part of the world. Can you talk about whether or not we're expecting any more investments? I think it was about 40 million that was announced, right?
Yes, so to put it in perspective, our annual budget, we are by far the largest grant-making foundation in the world. Our budget is around $8 billion a year. The vast bulk of that goes into health, is our biggest area of investment. We also work in agricultural development, financial inclusion, related activities, all focused on providing, ways to help save lives from preventable deaths and provide opportunities for the poorest and most vulnerable. Specifically, the event that we had this week in Dakar in Senegal is what we call our Grand Challenges program. That's where we're looking at research and development into new tools and opportunities that could disproportionately affect the poorest and most vulnerable. And there we made 2 specific sets of additional commitments. One was around the expansion of specific technology, which we've helped pioneer with a company called Quantum around vaccine mRNA manufacturing, the mRNA being the key vaccines that help address the COVID crisis, and we hope and believe in the future will be critical for diseases like malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, even potentially cancer. And so we had announced some very concrete partnerships with both a South African company, BioVac, a Senegalese company, the Institut Pasteur Dakar, and we're looking for other African countries where we'll do that. And then we had a second set of investments really looking at artificial intelligence. And there's so much discussion about AI generally, but there's not a lot looking at the potential application of AI to really provide services, enhanced services for the poorest. So, for example, we have a handheld device which you can use, a cell phone, which uses an AI algorithm which can actually help in low-resource health settings get the gestational age of a baby. It's the equivalent of an ultrasound. That has amazing impact in terms of reducing preventable maternal and child mortality. There are new tools in education, healthcare, other areas, and so those were the 2 sets of announcements, but they're complementary. We need the research and development investments that are going to be building the tools for the future, and then it's the doubling down on the tools that we have already, the vaccines, the basic health services, the digital financial infrastructure that can help people now.
Well, when you mentioned the 2 companies where I think it's $5 million going to each, where are the rest of those funds going to be allocated? Are you still looking for partners across the continent?
Yes, so we're in discussions with a number of countries. We convened a number of African countries recently at the UN General Assembly. This is also technology. While we're focusing these resources on Africa, this is a public good for the world. We've been working with countries like Brazil or Indonesia are also looking at how you can use the technology. And by the way, this is not just putting mRNA technology for the sake of it. This is a cheaper, more effective, more reliable version than what we've seen for the COVID vaccines. And again, our investments are helping create that as a public good for the continent.
And how do you see that aiding in? I think it was Bill Gates this week who said these investments are the first step, right, in sort of achieving health equity. What do you see as the next step? Because there still is a billions of dollar health equity gap in Africa.
Yes. So, you need a combination across all of it. You need first, African countries themselves need to keep prioritizing health and education. We combine the 2 as human capital investments as core priorities, which many of them are, but that's challenging in the constrained financial circumstances we talked about without debt relief and other tools. We need institutions like the World Bank really doubling down on its own support. And it was recently convening in Tanzania around human capital, which the Gates Foundation participated in, that the bank was leading around how they can help generate and do that. And so it's making sure that those pools of resources that the bank generates and that we're hoping will unlock through MDB reform both expand, we need that pie to expand, and then remain prioritized on some of those core investments in health and development. And then there are other partners like the World Health Organization, like the Gavi Vaccine Alliance, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB, and Malaria. We're significant funders in all of those, but those need to be able to continue to do their work, and then we'll see a repeat, we hope, of those massive reductions in mortality that we had in the first 2 decades of the 21st century that have stalled this decade.
Optimistic about the end of this week, seeing progress?
Well, we're always optimistic.
Yeah.
That's our sort of calling card at the Gates Foundation. We believe things can be done because they have been done in the past. We believe progress can be accelerated. We believe the political will is there. But as always, the proof, as I wrote in my article, has got to be in actually providing the resources, having people put their money where their mouth is, and then seeing it implemented. So yes, I'm hopeful this week will be an important step and we'll see some successful investments and announcements, but this has got to be part of a through line that goes through the climate discussions, that goes through next year, because this is not a one-off set of steps. This is a multi-year poly-crisis that we're in the middle of, and it's going to take a multi-year set of commitments and investments by all of us if we're going to get out of it and create the kind of opportunities for the future that we want.
That's Gates Foundation CEO Mark Suzman speaking with Bloomberg's Jennifer Zabasajja. Subscribe to the Bloomberg Talks podcast now to hear more conversations like this one. I'm Charlie Pellet, and this is Bloomberg.